Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. Today, we're going to discuss managing bees for 1D1 agricultural valuation. And more specifically, we're going to discuss whether property owners should DIY it, meaning do it yourself, or have the bee colonies professionally managed by a beekeeper. So before we begin, I just wanted to mention a little bit about myself. My name is Matt McCarchick. I'm the owner of Texas Bee Services. We do bee management for 1D1. We also do bee rescues and relocations in the Central Texas area. And we are based in Taylor, which is about 30 minutes northeast of Austin. And our website is texasbeeservices.com. You can go there to learn a little bit more about us. One other item before we jump in, I wanted to clarify what the intent is of today's presentation. I am in no way trying to discourage anyone from taking up beekeeping or discouraging people from having their hives managed in lieu of doing it yourself. My goal is to give a realistic picture of what is required to manage bees, especially when it comes to managing them for the purpose of 1D1 agricultural valuation. If you or anyone in your family is interested in beekeeping, I strongly urge you to learn as much as you can about beekeeping and to keep bees either as a hobby or to manage them for 1D1 agricultural valuation if you are so inclined. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started here. A couple definitions of what I'm referring to when I say DIY or managed beekeeping. Basically, DIY beekeeping means that you assume responsibility for the procurement and management of the bee colonies, whereas managed beekeeping just means the professional beekeeper, such as myself, will supply the bees and manage all aspects of their care. So when we're talking about managing all aspects of their care, what are we really talking about? Well, first, obviously, we need to talk about the purchase of the bees themselves. You're going to be purchasing the bees, the hive, and the tools necessary to actually manage and manipulate and inspect the hives and whatnot. We'll get a little into that a little bit more later. You will also manage hive inspections, supplemental feedings, any health issues that arise, such as queen loss, and treatment if you are choose to treat your bees. And also, 1D1 agricultural valuation processes require a certain amount of documentation. You have to not only document the purchasing of all of the equipment, the hives, the bees, everything of that nature, but you also have to document the inspections themselves to prove that you are actually actively managing these bees and that they're alive and healthy and doing the pollination, which is what they are expected to do in order to obtain that 1D1 valuation. And also you replace the bees if they should die due to starvation, disease, windstorms, wildlife, cattle, horses, what have you. Okay. So what then would the beekeeper manage if the colonies were professionally managed? And once again, we do the monthly visits to the bee colonies. We do all of the feeding, we do the health monitoring, and we also do all the documentation to prove that the hives are being managed. And then if the bees should die or abscond, obviously we're going to replace them as well. So if we're thinking maybe we'll give it a shot, maybe we'll try to DIY it instead of having them professionally managed. And begs the question, is it really that hard? And the short answer is yeah, it can be difficult, especially during the first few years. There's a really steep learning curve when it comes to beekeeping. So, even experienced beekeepers have to deal with colonies that die and abscond. The Apiary Inspectors of America did a survey in 2024 to 2025, on April 1st of 2024 to April 1st of 2025. And what they found was the beekeepers in the United States lost an average of 55.6% of their managed bee colonies. And when we narrowed down to specifically backyard beekeepers, then it goes down to 51.4% loss rate compared to commercial beekeepers at 56.2. So this description, or excuse me, this graph here shows the loss rate for the different types of beekeepers. Backyard beekeepers are defined as managing under 50 colonies, whereas sideline beekeepers have between 51 and 500, and commercial beekeepers have upwards of 500 bee colonies that they manage. And as you can see, I mean, the attrition rate for commercial or migratory beekeepers is definitely higher, mostly because they put their bees through an enormous amount of stress when they're shipping them all over the country and whatnot. So their loss rate is going to be higher, but still, even the backyard beekeeper loss rate is still 51.4%, which is high, especially when you consider that these this backyard beekeeper survey is more likely than not going to probably include more experienced beekeepers than first year beekeepers. I mean, intuitively, the most of the first year beekeepers might not respond to a survey such as this. So when we're talking about the backyard beekeepers, we're talking also about many beekeepers that have been in this for quite some time. Okay, so now we can discuss what some of the costs are if you decide you want to go ahead and do it yourself. And so what we're looking at here is some of the first year costs of the process of actually managing them yourselves. So these, I should mention these amounts, these are estimates only, obviously. Depending on your location, your beekeeping philosophy, these numbers can vary greatly. So keep that in mind. This is really just a starting point. But first, some of the expenses, supplies, as you can see here, we've got a smoker, hive tool, and the bee suit. I mean, these are the three things that I always use. You can't really live without these three things. I didn't include gloves on there. Usually a good bee suit will come with gloves, but if not, then you're going to need those as well. But supplies will run you, $250 somewhere around there, depending on the quality and whatnot. Then we can look at the hives. I've calculated this based on 6 hives. The reason I chose that is because 6 is the minimum number of hives or colonies that you're going to need in order to obtain agricultural valuation. That's if you have 5 or 6 acres that you're getting 1-to-1 on. If you're pushing 19, 20 acres, then obviously the number of bees is going to go way up. It can max out at like 12 or 13, depending on what county you're in. But it's never going to go below 6. So if we're looking at about $450 per hive/colony, times 6, you're looking at about $2,700 there. Sugar, it's going to be highest during the first year, but it's going to be about $50 per hive for that first year, which is for 6 hives, going to run you about $300. And then treatment, if you look at the picture on the lower left, you can see there's a big red splotch on that bee. That's a varroa mite. A lot of beekeepers choose to treat their bees. I'm not going to get into that in this presentation. There's, the vast majority of beekeepers do treat their bees. Not all beekeepers do. If you should choose to treat your bees, then generally they'll cost about $30 per year per hive. So for 6 hives, that'll run you about $180. So the first year is going to be around 3,300, give or take. Okay. And the recurring costs, once again, sugar is, roughly $50 per year. It could go down. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be the most intensive during the first year, depending on the weather patterns and various other factors. I mean, you might not need as much, but the treatment, if you choose to treat your bees, once again, that's not going to go down. That's still going to be about $180. So for the 6 hives, you're looking at about $480, $500 annually for the maintenance on those bees. And then obviously, if there's any loss of the bees, you have to replace them as well at the rate of about approximately 400. No, you presumably already have the hives, so the colony itself might run you about $300. Okay, and on that note, what if I need to replace the bees? And if you do it yourself, then you will need to purchase and then again feed a new colony, because the brand new colonies that you buy in what we refer to as a nuke or a nucleus colony, those are the most in need. That's like a colony that's just starting out, and those are going to need the most amount of sugar. And so you will need to purchase the nucleus colony as well as the sugar, and feed them on a biweekly basis to kind of get them started, get that comb built, and kind of get them off on the right foot. If it's managed, we have a little bit easier time replacing failed colonies, just because we can split colonies from a different location. And we can also, in our case with Texas Bee Services, we do rescues of bee colonies. So a lot of times we'll place a rescued colony out on a property. Generally speaking, a lot of times those feral colonies that we rescue from different buildings and whatnot, a lot of times those are extremely strong colonies, and we like to use them because they have those feral genetics that tend to be very strong and live a long time. And then obviously, if you're going to be managing yourself, there's always the safety concern. We always need to prioritize that. Anytime you work with bees, there are risks to you. Obviously these are stinging insects, and then Africanized bees. Africanized bees came over to the United States in, I believe, the 90s, and have become something of a problem here because in Africa, the bees that are native to that continent, they deal with a lot of natural threats, a lot of wildlife threats that they have to respond very aggressively to those threats. And they do so by basically attacking at the first instant, at the first sign of any imminent attack on their, or anything they perceive as an attack on their colony or their hive. Bring that out here. Now, anytime a beekeeper or anybody gets anywhere near that hive, those bees just go on the attack, and that is it's a genetic predisposition that we're trying to eliminate as best we can because it makes beekeeping really difficult. But at the same time, they're here, and we just kind of have to manage them as best we can. And then obviously we always have the potential or the possibility of allergic reactions to bees as well. And then obviously whenever you're working with bees, you have a risk to the colony, most specifically to the queens. Anytime you open up the hive and you're pulling frames, you have the risk of either injuring or killing the queen. And depending on what time of year that happens, it can lead to colony death if the colony is not able to replace the queen. Okay. And so the thing that you just want to make sure that you continue to do is continue to learn about beekeeping as much as possible. Beekeeping is a lot of fun, and if it's something that you think that you would like to get into, then I would always recommend that you start with a class and learn about beekeeping with bees that you keep for fun initially. Just kind of just for learning purposes. I would urge you not to use the bees that you're learning with for agricultural valuation, just because if they should die and then you need to replace them, and then they get you are inspected, and you don't have any bees there because they've all died, it can kind of create an awkward situation. So it's always best to learn about bees with your own, colonies that you can observe. And if you do lose the colonies, you can replace them as needed. And then once you would develop that understanding of how the bee colonies work and how they behave and how to properly manage them so that they survive, then you can use the bees or manage the bees that you're using for ag valuation. And as the old saying goes, no one teaches beekeeping better than bees. So there is only so much you can learn by classes. It's kind of like riding a bike. You can read books, but there's no substitute to just getting a bike on and giving it a go. And the same is true for beekeeping. You can learn so much from a class, but you will always learn a whole lot more by having them on your property and opening up the hive and kind of observing them. And that's really the best way to learn about bees. And as far as HOAs is concerned, most HOAs nowadays do allow beekeeping. They allow, at least a couple hives to be placed on most on residential properties. It's becoming more and more popular in suburban areas. And but although there are some HOAs that do explicitly forbid beekeeping, sometimes if there's a neighbor that is a little bit unpleasant or objecting to you keeping bees, a lot of times sharing some honey with them changes their attitude pretty quickly. But if you are not allowed to keep bees, what I've seen a lot of people do is partner with somebody in the region or your area who does have acreage and to say, hey, look, I'll put some bees on your property for free. I'll manage them. We can split the honey. I'll pay for the bees. You get the pollination. And then, you have a great way of being able to learn about the bees without having to, be in violation of any sort of homeowner ordinance or what have you. So it's a great option that a lot of people use. So that's the end of our presentation here today. Thank you very much for watching. And if you have any questions or would like any further information, my email right there is matt@texasbeeservices.com. Or you can go on to texasbeeservices.com/contact and you can reach me through that contact form. So thank you very much again for watching and happy beekeeping.